Welcome back to Tolkien with Friends. This week we are diving into Roast Mutton, the second chapter of The Hobbit, and the next 35-ish minutes of Peter Jackson's extended edition of An Unexpected Journey. Today we are so excited to welcome the amazing Anna Maria to the podcast. Anna Maria, thank you so much for being here.
Thank y'all so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
We are such big fans of yours. You have so many beautiful takes on Lord of the Rings and Tolkien. You're so smart, so talented. I could go on forever, but if people don't know you, can you let us know where to find you on the internet, first and foremost? And then I have some discussion that we can go into.
Absolutely. Yeah. Let's get our priorities straight. Number one, I am at only Anna Maria on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. I can't promise one kind of niche content, but I can promise good vibes. And that's what I'm offering. Good takes, good vibes. I am an actor, a writer, a community organizer. And before all those three things, I'm a Tolkien geek and enthusiast of the Tolkien. And that's why I'm here today. I'm very excited about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So make sure, if you got to pause this and go follow her, please do, and then come back. But in our last episode, we touched on our histories with The Hobbit book and film, just kind of how we, what were we fans of first and how we approached the movie. So, Anna Maria, I'd love if you could give us a little background on your experience with The Hobbit and, Tolkien in general, if you want, but mostly how you came to The Hobbit and how you generally feel about the Peter Jackson Hobbit movies.
Yeah, absolutely. So The Hobbit was my introduction to Tolkien. I was raised by two Tolkien enthusiasts because I won the lottery.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It was really lovely. And so I was 7 when I read The Hobbit, and it was when I was really little, my parents would read the same book that I would read, and we would read aloud to each other. And so one of my earliest memories is getting to the end of The Hobbit, trying to read aloud Thorin's death, and I couldn't get through it. And so I had to hand the book to my dad because I was crying so hard.
That is precious and relatable.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cry the same every time.
Yeah.
And the year after that, I watched the original trilogy, and then the year after that, I read the trilogy, and then the rest is history. I actually wasn't sold on the Hobbit movies when I first watched Unexpected Journey as a teenager, because I was a teen when they came out, until I logged onto Tumblr.
That was the place.
As I did back in the day, and very rapidly joined the burgeoning Hobbit adaptation fandom that started growing in earnest online. And so actually joining that community gave me a completely different relationship with the movies, and all the added canon and character traits that Peter Jackson offered. And so I am an unapologetic, slightly apologetic Hobbit apologist. In that I fully agree with every single structural and technical critique leveled at them, but I love them very dearly, and they did inform a lot of my relationship with Tolkien throughout my adolescence.
That's perfect. That's perfect, because it's we like to approach the books and the movies, with an open mind and open heart, right? With Lord, when we did Lord of the Rings, that was one where it was I pretty much knew, there was a little finagling that I had to do as far as making the chapters match up with the parts of the movie and stuff, but I pretty much knew exactly what point that movie, and I have them memorized, you know what I mean, and they are so beloved and watched over and over again. But it just makes me think about, if the Hobbit movies entered your life at a similar time that the Lord of the Rings entered mine, they are probably enmeshed in your brain in a similar way. And so I just think that they're pretty fascinating. What is hilarious to me is that Josh, my husband, has always really shat all over the Hobbit movies. But when I watch it for the podcast, I stop it, right? Like I only watch like 40 minutes and then I move on to like write my notes and stuff. And Josh will be like, hey, why'd you stop it? I'm like, well, I don't want to get confused later. And he's like, why don't you keep it playing? So I think this journey is really, it's going to be good for all of us in the long run, because it's like, yes, there are, issues, I think, with the way the Hobbit movies go, but at the same time, man, like, they are just kind of a fun romp in Middle Earth.
They're a romp, and that's what you gotta look at it as. Because listen, in the book, like, half those dwarves didn't get a single descriptor. You know what I mean? Like, we're just a romp.
Yeah. I mean, it's like Thorin hangs out, like, Balin and Dwellin kind of stand out in the books, but and Bombur only stands out because he's literally massive. But like, you know what I mean? Like he it's not like he has like a lot. And I don't really know if he has a lot going on for him in the movies yet either. We haven't necessarily gotten to know everybody. Like Thorin is definitely stand out, but they all have like a very different vibe while still feeling dwarfy. Like, but they're, we haven't got to know them quite yet. We're still early on this unexpected journey, so that's cool. So with that, if we want to just dive into it, so now in this part of the story, we open in both the book and the movie with Bilbo waking up to find that the dwarves and Gandalf have gone. Now in the book, it says at first that Bilbo is really relieved after all to think that they had all gone without him, but it goes on to say, like within the same paragraph, and yet in a way he could not help feeling just a little bit disappointed. And I feel like in the movie they accomplished this with the music. When Bilbo's kind of walking around his house and looking around and he looks back at the contract, the way that the music kind of like swelled, it has like a disappointed vibe, like almost like, oh man, what if you had done that? And so here's kind of where we diverge, like in and of course, like, things happen quicker in the movie, so it totally makes sense. But in the movie, they have Bilbo, like, be like, hey, I'm busting out my front door, I've got my contract signed, and he's like, I'm going on an adventure, right? Like, that is, like, probably one of the most iconic GIFs that I've ever seen, and it's so fun to use, where he's just
I'm
like,
going on an adventure.
Yeah. So that is movie Bilbo. What I do want to say that I think it is important to note the difference for the book, just because I think that it implies that Bilbo is so polite that he doesn't refuse this journey, not because he like decides to go, or even he hasn't even really decided that he totally isn't committed to it, but he's just so polite that he doesn't refuse. So, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So, in the book, Bilbo is sitting down for a second breakfast after cleaning up with all the dwarf mess.
Like, cleaning up everything. Oh my gosh.
Except he did not dust his mantle.
That's missed the
So Gandalf turns up and he's like, why didn't you dust your mantle?
After cleaning up breakfast for 15 dwarves.
Yeah.
Gandalf was out of pocket for that. Like, let him relax.
He's like, what about an early start? And Bilbo was like, I was lying. What do you mean? And so Bilbo realizes that the dwarves left him a message to meet them at the Green Dragon by 11 o'clock. And then this is where Gandalf is like, that leaves you just 10 minutes. You'll have to run. And he goes, but no time for it. But no time for that either. Off you go. And he shoves his keys into Gandalf's hand and just runs for it.
Just books it.
Yeah. So the running is accurate. I do love that when he does get to the dwarves, and I think this is his moment where, like, if he was talking to a hobbit, they would have been like, oh man, you can't go, like, don't worry about it. But because he says, I'm awfully sorry, but I've come without my hat and I have left my pocket handkerchief behind and I haven't got any money. He's like, there's no way I can go on this. And he's like, and I didn't get your message until like 10:45 to be precise. And Dwellin's like, yeah,
be precise, says Dwellin.
And don't worry. And he's like, You will have to manage without pocket handkerchiefs and a good many other things before you get to the journey's end. And as for a hat, I've got a spare hood and cloak in my luggage. I'm like, helpful. That's sweet. I like that. In the movie, they give the "you'll have to manage" line to Gandalf. But I am a little sad that they didn't let anybody offer him a cloak and hood, because later there's a scene not too long from here where it's pouring rain and everybody's got a hood on except for Bilbo. He's just like in his waistcoat drenched. And I was like, oh.
Listen, one thing about Peter Jackson and the Hobbit adaptations, any singular moment where he could find to give like just a little bit more conflict to the scene, he took it.
Yes.
He took it. He said Bilbo is not getting a hood.
Yeah. Bilbo is drenched, okay? He's having a bad time. And then because this is switched around, we also lose the part that I think is adorable, is just Gandalf, like, having apparently read Bilbo's mind, shows up with a bunch of handkerchiefs and a pipe and smoking tobacco. Like, key to Bilbo's survival.
Hobbit.
Yeah. It's like, you know what this Hobbit needs? He doesn't need to pack extra clothes or food. This Hobbit is going to be so grumpy if I don't get him his pipe and tobacco. Where he's going to be so grumpy, he's going to be unbearable. I need to bring these things.
Period.
Yeah. So I think that is like a slight difference between Gandalf and Hobbit is in the book, is just that he's just a little sillier. You know what I mean? Like, he's just like, huzzah, and he's a little more like, he just kind of dips in and out whenever it suits him. So you know, in the book, obviously, like, it's called Roast Mutton because of the troll scene, and however, in the movie we have a little bit extra stuff before we get to our trolls, and a lot of that comes from the appendices of Lord of the Rings, which when I was rereading that, I was getting really excited because I just think it's like really interesting dwarf lore that does, you know, we just don't talk about it that much in the world of Tolkien stuff, and it's so good. I'm like, this could be a movie. Like, but there's like a bunch of stuff in the appendices about this particular time in dwarf history. So there is a scene where we see like Fili and Keely and some of the other dwarves like teasing Bilbo about orcs, you know, and Thorin chastises them, and is, you know, Balin goes on to explain that, you know, Thorin's past experience with orcs have made him, you know, take orcs very seriously, and he goes on to kind of explain a little bit about the war of the dwarves and the orcs. Specifically, in the movie, Balin says that Thror, aka Thorin's grandpa, had tried to reclaim Moria, aka Khazad-dûm, but their enemy had got there first. The movie then immediately shows like a large battle between the orcs and the dwarves, like a ton of them. They're just everywhere. They're crawling all over the Misty Mountains. And I have to admit that when I first watched this, I was like, okay, this seems like blown way out of proportion here. Like, what is this? Why is the scale so epic? But after rereading the appendices, I was like, all right, Peter, like, yeah, that battle would have been pretty big. And however, I think that, I mean, you know, the cause of the war is really oversimplified in the movie, and a lot of context is missing, which is what I kind of want to talk about here, because I just found it so interesting. And for reference, this is from Appendix A under Durin's Folk. So, you know, we've given an explanation about Smaug and how they're not an Erebor anymore, but then there's been a lot of time in between about, like, so this happened in between after Smaug had taken Erebor, and, you know, obviously in everyone's past, but relatively recent past. So we find out that Thror had given his Ring of Power, one of the 7 given to the Dwarf Lords, to Thrain before setting off to Moria. And I think so that's something important to just hold on to for later. But he sets off to Moria, and it reads, he was a little crazed, perhaps with age and misfortune and long brooding on the splendor of Moria in his forefathers' days. Or the ring, it may be, was turning to evil now that its master was awake, driving him to follow and destroy, you know, driving to, what was it? I wrote it down wrong. Dang it, Andy.
How dare you not have every word of Tolkien's Legendarium?
Where's our grandpa? Let's see. We've got to folly and destruction. It's always, of course, it's folly. That's like one of Tolkien's favorite words. It's like just assume that it's folly. So driving him. So maybe it was him just being a crazy old man. Maybe the ring was making him think that Moria was reclaimable, and because as if just in general, we know that like Sauron is doing things, but nobody's really worried about that quite yet in this point of the story. I mean, Gandalf is, but we'll get to that later. So he, decides to go to Moria with only his friend Nair. I don't know how to say dwarf names. Nar. It's Nar. It's got an accent, but I don't really know what Tolkien means by that accent. So he goes, and we notice that the gates are weirdly already open, and this is on the other side of the Misty Mountains. Like if we remember the Fellowship, it's not the gates of Moria that we enter with the Watcher in the Water. It's on the other side that he enters through. And so Nar stays back while Thror goes in, but he never makes it out. This is where we first meet Azog, who has killed Thror and branded his face. He's like chopped off his head and put Azog on his face and runes so that Nar could read it. And so Nar is basically used as like, Azog is like, go back to people, tell them what is up, like, get out of here. And so he brings this news back to Thrain, but not before he sees the orc hack Thror's body to pieces. And then I wrote in my notes, Tolkien, why? It gets so gnarly in the appendices, you guys. So, I mean, I get why Peter didn't necessarily show that, but at the same time, like, the idea of Azog wanting to end the line of Durin isn't necessarily true. It's more like Thror tried to show up, Azog is chilling, and he doesn't want anybody else to be there. You know what I mean? Like, it's orc shit now. It's no dwarfs. And so then we find out in the appendices that it took like 3 years, but Durin's folk, we've got the whole line of Durin here, and that's like our friends from Erebor. They gathered all their host, and they were joined by great forces sent from the houses of other fathers. For this dishonor to the heir of the eldest of their race filled them with wrath. So, there's also a little bit in there about how Durin, the Deathless, that's why they're called Durin's folk. They're descended from Durin, who lived a really long time. He was not, in fact, deathless, but he did live longer than most dwarves, and they also have a belief about how people are only renamed Durin if they're believed to be like a reincarnation of Durin the Deathless. So, you in the appendices, there's also a lovely breakout of Durin's line. You see the name Durin appear a few times, but here it's really like Thror, Thrain, and Thorin that are like main leaders at the time. And so they're all upset. This battle becomes so big because literally, like, from all corners of Middle-earth, all the dwarves come together to kind of avenge Thror's death. And that's why this battle gets so out of hand. And it's a war, really, a war between the orcs and the dwarves, which implies that it's much longer than one fight, right? And so that is really the cause of this battle that is suddenly, that Balin is just describing to Bilbo, which I thought was really interesting. Just thinking about how there was so much going on there. They're wandering. We hear a little bit about the ring that, should have been passed down to Thorin, but it's not. Doesn't make it. And I know we'll hear more about that later as well. But, we just get a little bit more about what is going on with Durin's folk and the other dwarves. And I also think it's important that, you would think that after that maybe, so like Thrain, for example, he wants to try to reclaim Khazad-dûm after winning, even though it is heavy, heavy losses. It's like less than half of them are survived this, even though they technically won, and like the rest of the crew, the rest of the families of dwarves are like, no, we're gonna go. And then finally someone says to Thrain, like, hey, like, we will follow you to whatever, but we are not trying to take back Khazad-dûm. Like, you still haven't even considered the whole Durin's Bane situation. So we're not gonna do it. So, again, that's how you get to where we are in this story, where, the dwarves aren't really united. They're all kind of doing their own thing in various mountain ranges, and this is why Thorin has like just a small company of folks, because as you can kind of see, like, they're not really ones to like unite under one banner to overtake something that's kind of horribly scary. Durin's Bane being one of them, Smaug being another.
Right, not like the finest warriors in the land.
Yeah, they're like, we'll do what we have to, but I think, yeah, and it's like, and I think that the avenging Thror was pretty rare, and in pretty much only like a one-time deal, but such a cool, interesting bit of history, and I kind of wish that Balin had thrown in a line to kind of give some context to Thror, because that is, I mean, we see, Bilbo had told us about Thror and Thrain. Why not throw another name out there instead of saying this whole like trying to wipe out the line of Durin? I mean, it's like that's just too much of a commitment, I think, to give to an orc, personally. But hey,
and that's like, and it's an interesting nod to like Tolkien's real loyalty to the idea of like genealogy and bloodline, which is like pretty pervasive through his books. But it's also like a wild thing to throw at Bilbo. Bilbo's just like, what? Can I have a little bit more information? And they're like, absolutely not. You get to know the stakes and the drama with no context. Yeah. I love that. Love that choice.
Yes, definitely a choice, for sure. One other thing that I wanted to point out is that the appendices gives a clear cause of death for Azog.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah. So, in the appendices version, we've got Azog killing Nain, who is, one of our real ones here, but after he kills him, he realizes that Azog's army, like his orc army, isn't actually winning anymore, and he tries to retreat, and that's when Dane Ironfoot, Nain's son, shows up, and he, with his red axe, very specifically red, because fashion, and
you the cosplayers. They just threw that information in just for the cosplayers.
Yes.
Red axe, everybody.
Exactly. Get it right. If you're being Dane, it's a red axe. And I love it. I mean, essentially what happens is that he kills Azog, chops off his head, and that is it. Azog done. They have won. It's very clear cut, right? And I love Dane. I love that it goes on to be like, Dane goes on to do a lot of cool things, and doesn't die until the War of the Ring. And this was kind of like his first big moment, because he was pretty young here. But in the movies, Thorin clearly thinks Azog is dead, but they clearly leave it open, and like they have orcs dragging him back in the flashback. He's only lost an arm, and we'll see why Peter does this soon. At the very end of this section of movie, we see some orcs on wargs. I haven't seen Azog yet, but I know he's a coming. But I did just want to point out that book version, he's quite dead.
What I'm interested in is like, because I know a lot of people had beef with the Azog thing, and I'm able to just sort of turn my brain off and vibe, but you know what I mean? But what's always been interesting to me is that it seems out of character for Thorin to assume that such a not necessarily lethal wound would, like, it seems weird that he would just be like, gee golly, I sure got him, and like did it. He's such a relentless person. Like in the movies, he's established as this really relentless being who will go for what he wants, and he was very thorough, and so it seems weird to me that he would just kind of accept that. And be at peace with that. But that's truly my biggest gripe. Like, more than bringing back Azog, that seems like very out of character to me. But,
I would agree with that. It's like Thorin, you're so, I don't know, maybe it just, he wanted to, because later we also see, Thorin, I think he's got like probably some kind of own personal narrative in his head about how things are.
Right.
Like,
he's a little delusional. We love our delusional king.
Because like in the beginning, that's also something with the whole like dwarves reclaiming their homeland narrative. I'm like, this is about money, okay? Like, that's really what this is. But he's got he kind of like puts a little spin on it, a little PR spin about how to make this a little bit more palatable for people. And so maybe that's similar. Like, he's like, yes, I avenged, my grandpa and my dad and blah, blah, blah. So
maybe so.
Maybe.
Good job,
I don't know. Yeah.
You really did it.
Yeah. That's all right. It's cool. I just thought that was interesting. Interesting choice.
A bold choice. Bold choice.
Yeah. just some differences. We're just pointing them out here. Whether they work for you, let us know.
Journalism. We're doing subjective work.
And there is another nugget in here where we see Gandalf, like Bilbo asks about the other wizards, and I think it's adorable that like they've got Gandalf being like, I've quite forgotten their names about our two blue wizards. But we also get the appearance of Radagast, and I think he is played so wonderfully by Sylvester McCoy.
Thank you. People have beef with Radagast, and I love him. Bird poop and all.
Yeah, bird poop and all. Like, he freaking would. You know what I mean?
He would.
He would. And it's like, if they're gonna, they cut him out of Lord of the Rings, and I honestly love that they gave him a part in the movies, because they made the decision to include the White Council stuff, and I think it only makes sense to have Radagast be a part of that. And so, like, we've gotten a little taste of it with his little hedgehog friend, and I made a joke to Josh. I was like, do you think I should point out that, like, a hedgehog named Sebastian is probably not canonical? But
I cannot hear it. I refuse to hear it.
I don't know. I just don't know if Sebastian would be his name, but that's cool. We love him. He's adorable. But I do love. I don't know. I think I could watch a Sylvester McCoy scene, whatever he's doing. Like, Radagast is wonderful, and he provides the whimsy that The Hobbit requires.
Yeah. Like, he's very, like, I think Peter Jackson had a really interesting like job at hand of making the intentionally whimsical Hobbit fit in with the like with the extremely serious, realistic, quote unquote framework of his trilogy, of like Jackson's own trilogy. I think he worked really hard to walk that line, even with like the designs of all of Thorne's company. Like, I think he was fighting for his life to make both worlds work. And sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. But like, I respect the amount of effort he put in to try and make both things synthesize.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's where, like, you see that very intentional effort. And I think sometimes it's like, well, should we have just recognized that The Hobbit is a very different tone and, like, just gone full forward that way? Like, do we really need to make them mesh? But at the same time, when I found out that they were going to be 3 Hobbit movies and that they were going to include White Council and like necromancer stuff, I was like, no, that's great though. Like, I think that they should give people that context, that just like, while The Hobbit should ultimately be, about Bilbo and his personal journey at the same with like being intermeshed with all this dwarf stuff. I think at the same time, like that's very important context to have for like the state of Middle Earth, you know, where it's like most people are kind of like oblivious to maybe some of the evil or like the changes happening, but then you've got this very concerted effort by like Gandalf and the White Council, you know, and it's also very interesting to me when you see interviews with I know we haven't gotten there, but like as a, I think you'll, if you haven't listened to any of Lord of the Rings and you're just starting here, I'm a huge Christopher Lee girl. Like I am obsessed with him as Saruman, and it's so interesting to when he talks about like really trying to give this version of Saruman before he turns totally evil, you know? And I think that's cool. I think that's great. And yeah, I was all for it, you know? It's just like, there are certain things where I'm like, well, maybe that was a little too much. But overall, like, it's whatever. It's cool.
I'm really curious about how all the, because yeah, I totally agree. I think the White Council stuff is really necessary context. And I'm curious about how it read to people with no knowledge of the Legendarium. Like, if those movies are your first entry into Tolkien's world, does that added context make sense? And I have no access to that because I can't wipe my brain and watch them for the first time.
I know.
I'm so curious if that's helpful to first-time viewers. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a great
extended
question.
edition stuff, or is that?
No, it's in the theatrical too.
Okay.
It's a theatrical cut. Probably a little bit less, but definitely still there, I would say. Because like those, like the big battle at Dol Guldur, you know, I think it's all there.
Yeah, definitely Gandalf, Galadriel, Saruman stuff is there. Like I know for sure that they all have that little conversation, and there's like a scene at some point with Rivendell. Yeah, so I know that it's there. I don't quite remember exactly like where it diverges, but the people on Twitter told me to watch the extended edition, so that's what I've been doing.
The people on Twitter.
That's what I did. A poll, and that was what won. Maybe I should have done it on Instagram too, but that's all right.
I ride or die for the extended, so I love that.
Yeah, and that's like I can't. What's interesting about the difference between my experience with Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, right, is that with Lord of the Rings, I've pretty much only watched the extended edition for the past 20 years, right? And with The Hobbit, I just haven't seen them enough to really pinpoint the difference. Like, I think I rewatched them a couple years ago, but I don't think I did the extended. Because I was like, that's a lot to ask of me at this point.
For 4 years.
So this time we're doing extended cut. So I can't exactly say. I know sometimes you can kind of tell as far as like when the pacing will change sometimes, but not always. You know? So
absolutely.
So there's that.
Not us.
Yeah. Somebody knows, but it ain't me. But you know, so that's, you know, we just get a little glimpse of Radagast and his furry friends and
his Baskerville rabbits.
Yes, I think the rabbits are cool. And we get our first kind of glimpse of the spiders. You know, we just kind of see their booties moving off in the distance after they climb all over his house. But I really love it when his face is like, it's not like it's witchcraft, and he's like, oh, but it is.
Oh, the drama. The literal.
I love him. I think he's so great. And it's like, I think that's one thing that's like so cool about Middle Earth is like we don't have that many wizards, you know? So I'm glad that we threw another one into the mix for The Hobbit. Like, I mean, of course Saruman will show up, but like Radagast gets his time to shine, and I appreciate it.
He deserves. He really deserves.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like even Gandalf shits on him a little bit, so it's kind of like, give him his moment. Yeah. So that's Radagast. I'm excited to see more of him. I know that he meets up with our heroes soon. But, you know, this part in the book, it's really all about the trolls. So I think it's time that we get to the trolls.
Let's do it. Our boy.
Yes. What do we got? Bert, Tom, and William?
William, Bert, and Tom.
Yes.
Legends.
And Bert has a last name too, Bert Huggins. You can call his full name at some point.
Great.
I wonder if they're related. I don't know. I think Huggins is a pretty adorable name for a troll.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Maybe he wasn't always bad. Who knows? I also appreciate that in the books, like, William is very much like, I don't feel like eating these guys, or Bilbo at least, and but his friends are like very ravenous. Like, come on, give Bilbo a break. This is his first attempt at burglary. Leave him alone.
Right, because Bilbo had no adjustment time. Like, he was just thrown on the deep end.
Yes.
They were like, the universe was like, sink or swim.
Trial by fire. For Bilbo. Because it's like, at this point in the book, not a lot, it's been pretty okay going until we get to this like torrential downpour, right? And they are hungry and they are grumpy, and they lost a bunch of their food because one of the ponies got scared and ran into the river, and so they see this light in the distance and they're like, well, we're gonna go investigate it, but actually we're gonna make Bilbo go investigate it. And they're like, what, hoot like an owl or something if you get into trouble, and Bilbo's like, I actually have no idea how to do that, but okay.
They tell him to hoot twice like a barn owl and once like a screech owl. And Bilbo was like, I can't hoot like any owl.
Yeah. Like, okay, if this was going to be our signaling system, could somebody have mentioned it previous to this? Like,
I love it. I will also say, like, in the movies, the actors delivered that, like, magnificently. I enjoyed Killy and Philly in the movies for sure. That makes me laugh every time. That whole bit, excellent.
I know. I think they're pretty cute, and they're we know that they're the youngest, but really in the book they're all kind of like old men with beards. You know what I mean? They've got different colored hoods. But in the movie, they really are like, no, these are younger guys. They're silly gooses, and they're going to get Bilbo into some trouble here. So in the movie, like, Feely and Killy are supposed to be watching the ponies, and they have not done a great job. So the trolls have walked off with most of the ponies. And so a little different setting, it's not raining, everything's like, the weather's fine, that's not really an issue, and also, like, I guess the trees must be tight enough because once they are in that whole troll scene, like, the talk of rain is like pretty much over, even though that was like the whole reason that they wanted to go to this fire, but we forgot about the weather at this point, and so Bilbo in both situations kind of thrust forward. And so in the movie, Bilbo was really, I appreciate movie Bilbo for trying to get those ponies back. Like, that was his focus. Like, how do I get the ponies escape? Kind of hate that he has used like a tissue.
That is, objectively speaking, nasty. Nasty as hell. For no
I wasn't
reason.
prepared for it,
Right.
I was like, wait, what?
I don't think Bilbo was either.
And then he just has to be covered in snot for the rest of the scene.
Yes.
And I am like, it's in a post-COVID world, absolutely.
Right. Like, we're traumatized. Like, we're fully having trauma responses to this.
I couldn't deal with it. I was like, oh, no, Bilbo. But the way he gets caught in the book, also a little more whimsical. We've got him reaching into one of their pockets. I don't really remember who, but basically the wallet or his purse that's in his pocket is like, hey, who are you? I understand why they didn't do that in the movie, but
that would have been very confusing.
Yeah,
and probably another creature to introduce. So.
Yeah, not a lot of like inanimate objects speaking in most of Tolkien, so like just the one wallet. It's got the defense. It's a little Harry Potter, a little bit.
Or was there something in the wallet, or was it the wallet itself?
No, it's the wallet.
Oh, yeah, I think it was William's wallet.
Yeah,
I think he straight up was just just tried to take the whole wallet, even though it was like as big as he was. And I'm like, Bilbo, what are we thinking? What is our thought?
He was like, I can't go back empty-handed.
He was like, like, no. And this is the part that I think is like missing from the movies, is like his desire to kind of live up to Gandalf's recommendation, and like the tookishness of Bilbo. Like, he's still very Bagginsy, I think, at this point, as far as like kind of being grumpy and a little bit more like, you know, I don't want to be doing this. But his desire to try to prove himself to these dwarves is very strong, and that is why he's like, well, and the way Tolkien like lays it out is like, well, you know, like a very skilled burglar would have done X, Y, and Z, but Bilbo thought he would have the best shot at just like grabbing the purse and getting out of there, and he's like, what, you know, probably should have just gone back to the dwarves and been like, hey, there's 3 trolls. Of course, in the movie, we know that there's trolls. Like, Bilbo just has to figure out how to get the ponies. And so he gets Snitzeled on, and then the dwarves come in to all rescue him at once, and we have like a big swell of music, and it's kind of like kind of supposed to be kind of epic, and I'm like, no, this is too silly for that.
I'm on board. Here's the thing. Howard Shore went so hard on, because we already knew what he could bring, okay? Yes. And he brought it again. Yes. He brought it again. And so every time I hear the Thorn, Oak, and Shield theme, I'm like, I don't care if he's picking roses in a field, okay? I am on board. This is the most epic moment of all time. I'm here. I'm so easy to please. If Howard Shore has made the soundtrack, I'm on board.
Yeah, I mean, that is totally valid. So they all come in to rescue Bilbo. In the book, it's more like, of course, it's a little different, right? Because they're expecting like Tim to hoot like a fucking owl, and they're like, "Oh, I haven't heard from him in a bit." Like, and then they one by one like sneak in, and then the trolls realize like, "Oh my gosh, there's you know, not what is it that Bilbo says? Not only that he's a burrow hobbit, but there is lots and lots of him and none at all." Like, oh yeah, I've got tons of friends.
Right,
actually,
Hobbit.
Yeah, and then that's when in the book the trolls are like, oh, I get it. Not only one burrow hobbit, but a bunch of dwarves, and so then they like hang out in the shadows and like put them in sacks as they enter the clearing. But Thorin is the one in the book that is like a little bit wise to their game and like fights them a little bit, but still everyone gets captured, and this is the point where it's kind of, but Bilbo doesn't get captured, and he's just kind of like, they forgot about him a little bit, and he's like, oh, what do I do? And I think like a key difference here, and you know, honestly, like I'm kind of glad they gave this to Bilbo in the movie, is that in the book we basically hear voices that sound like Bert, Tom, and Williams.
Now we get into the nitty gritty and the big difference. Yeah.
So like we hear these voices, and we, as a reader, just kind of assume that it must be one of the trolls talking to each other, right? And but it starts to say like a voice like Tom's, a voice like Williams, and so we're kind of like, what is going on here? So they're arguing over how to best cook these dwarves and the best preparations they can make, you know. And they're like, hey, we need to figure this out because the sun's gonna come up and then it's game over. But they're just kind of slow and a little bit stupid, so they like they just keep arguing about it because somebody keeps stirring the pot. But in the movie, Bilbo is the one who confuses the trolls and about how you should properly cook a dwarf. We also get some silly lines about how they're infested, and you know, you got some like, I've got worms.
Are not clever enough to play along with the bit.
Yeah. I just love Thorin's like
infested. Oh, I'm so infested.
I got worms the size of my arms, like stuff like that. That's fun, you know.
Oh, that's right. It was worms in their tubes.
Yeah.
Right. This is science at its finest. Y'all understand? This is brilliant work.
So it's like, you know, Bilbo is the one that's kind of like messing with them in that and he sees Gandalf out of the corner of his eye. In the book, we do not know that it is actually Gandalf that has shown up, but he does. And what is funny that happens is that, like, in one of the trolls' voices, Gandalf says, you know, and let the dawn take you all, or whatever, and turn you to stone. But in the movie, I think it does sound better to have Gandalf just use his voice. Like, come on.
This big, scary, deep voice. That
it's Ian McKellen!
Yeah.
Yeah, Tolkien failed to consider Ian McKellen.
Yeah. Huge mistake.
I love that.
So I think that definitely works, you know, and I am glad that they gave that to Bilbo, because, like, later we're gonna see them take, I'm gonna say, moments away from Bilbo rather than adding. So I'm glad they gave him this. You know,
me and Callie both just went, yeah.
For sure. We'll get there. I'm not trying to jump ahead, you know, but if you know, you know. So I'm really, like, again, like with Lord of the Rings, I'm not assuming that anybody is just watching these for the first time if you're listening to this. You know what I mean? Like, we did not do that with Lord of the Rings, but I try to keep it within the bounds of the chapter. Mostly.
100%. You're
bit,
professional.
Yeah. So that's the end of the trolls, and love them. I love that they get a little moment in Lord of the Rings too, with, you know, Sam being like, hey, there they are. And I really do think that Peter tried to get them in the same, like, hunched over positions as they are in Fellowship. So that was nice. So I was like, I see.
Really nice touch. Yeah, I loved that.
I see you doing that. And so then we get to, you know, Gandalf is like, there's no way that they just, like, showed up here. Like, where do they hide, you know, during the daytime? So we get the troll horde, which I think is great. We don't get, like, Gandalf doing, like, they do bury some of the treasures that they find, and it's cute, you know, making a long-term deposit. That's a cute line. We don't get Gandalf doing spells over it, which I kind of wanted to see, low-key. Like, they bury it and do spells over that part of the ground. But
I'm torn because I almost like, because I feel like, I don't know, Gandalf is so sparing with his magic. Like, he's so low key about it. You know what I mean? He's, like, very secretive about it. So I kind of like that he's like, I'm not wasting my magic on y'all's nonsense.
Yeah.
On your
that's fair.
Little bank accounts. Like,
that's fair. That's fair. And I think it's funny because this ends up being more like a lot of the gold that Bilbo lives off of later. Like, because he actually can't carry most of what he's gonna get later, you know. So but got
gold isn't the most important thing they find there, is it?
Absolutely not. Callie, you reading my mind all the time. So here is where we've got some swords. We've got some swordy boys that show up, and we later will find out that this is Glamdring, Orcris, and Sting. Sting doesn't have his name yet, but he will.
We'll earn it.
What I thought was crazy is that in the movie, Gandalf just straight up is like, these were forged in Gondolin. I was like,
you just drop that in.
Yeah.
I was like, okay.
No, like I love when Peter Jackson's just like, all right, this is a softball. I'm gonna launch it at full velocity. $1 million more. Here it is. You have, most of y'all will have no access to this information, but take it anyway. I love it.
Yeah. Because in the book, you know, Gandalf is just kind of like, these were not forged by men. These are definitely not made by trolls. But, you know, when we find someone to read the runes, then we'll figure it out. I'm like, oh, Gandalf, you don't want to read them? You're not going to read those runes?
Like, he's pretty dumb. Like, we know you can read it.
Yeah. Yeah, Gandalf in this he's very like, he's just a silly goose. Truly,
he's just a little guy.
Yeah.
He's just a little guy running around being mischief.
I mean, he's like, I'm gonna send this Hobbit on an adventure just because I feel like it. He gives me good vibes. I'm gonna throw him into that, and like the whole like, and they do keep the, like, where the hell were you? And he was like, I was looking ahead, and he's like, what brought you back? Looking behind. I mean, I love that they kept that. It's like such good Tolkienian lines. They deserve to stay. A line that I take issue with here.
Ooh.
Is when Gandalf is talking to Bilbo, he's like, here, take this sword, it glows blue, it's very neat. And Bilbo's like, I've never used a sword in my life, I can't do it. And then at some point, at the end of that conversation, Gandalf is like, true courage is not about when to take a life, but when to spare one. And it's like, all right, like, sure, this is like, it sounds very nice, it's very cute, and it's like foreshadowing or whatever. However, I do not like that this implies that Gandalf has anything to do with the decision that Bilbo makes later with Gollum.
Yeah.
Because later, in Fellowship, Gandalf is very, like, clear to Frodo about Bilbo. He's like, no, the reason the ring doesn't work on you, or work on Bilbo the way that you would expect it to, is because he came to it with pity and mercy in his heart. You know what I mean? This isn't something that, like, Gandalf planted there for him. This isn't an idea that Gandalf, like, gave to Bilbo. That is just Bilbo being his most Bilbo-y self at that moment when he spares Gollum's life. So it's like,
yeah, it's such a shame too, because like Martin Freeman delivered, I think, a beautiful performance of Bilbo. Like
100%.
Watching him work every time, like it's like disgusting how good he is. But, and I remember that scene so vividly when like he's in, the Wraith realm because he has the ring on and he's ready to smite. Sorry guys, we're jumping ahead. Wait, okay, anyways, but that scene is like so imprinted in my brain, and like Martin's face, like you see wordlessly the entire journey he goes through, and I think he delivered that so beautifully that I'm like, I completely agree. I do wish that like we'd been able to just trust the actor to do what needed to be done in that moment rather than like spoon feed the audience in that way.
Yeah, it wasn't needed. Like, Bilbo is, he's always gonna be Bilbo. Like, he doesn't, that's the thing, is that like when he, like, sure, he has Gandalf's influence as far as like getting his foot like literally out the door, and he has Gandalf for to like save him in moments where he needs it. But ultimately, like, this story is Bilbo kind of taking a leadership role in his own life, and that is also part and parcel of making that pivotal decision to not hurt Gollum at the end, because it is so, like, seeing Gollum, like, when you have the upper hand and you're facing Gollum, it's just sad, like, obviously when you're both like in the grips, like, we've seen Gollum fight, you know what I mean, and it's like, it's just, he's scary, but at the same time, like, when you are holding all the cards, it's like it's hard to not feel bad for him. So and I think it's so key to like not only Bilbo's growth but also like just how the world works, that it's I do like, the line is cute or whatever, and I'm sure it's fun to like make little videos with it, but like sound clips or whatever. But at the end of the day, I would have left that one at home if I had to pick one thing out of this.
That's a good thing. I like that. That's a lovely assessment. I completely agree.
So,
not we're geniuses.
Wow. We're smart, but we're silly.
Like Gandalf.
Yeah, we're basically Gandalf. I mean,
it's the only conclusion to draw, I fear.
I think that's correct. But really, that's like all the notes that I had for today. Does anybody have anything else that we really want to talk about with Roast Mutton, or like the chapter itself, or the parts of the movie? So, the movie ends with we see some orcs, and I like stopped it. I was like, no, they're like out of the troll horde now. Like we're not getting into that yet. So that's pretty much where we end, and we have a short rest coming up next, and so I'm pretty sure that means Rivendell. And but in between Bilbo waking up in the Shire to getting some Goldberry
encounter.
Yeah. Anything that we missed?
No, but I actually did kind of want to circle back to like that initial difference of like Bilbo's like hyper politeness in the book versus the iconic "I'm going on an adventure,"
Yeah.
I think it has so much to do with I'm just exposing myself as like a Martin Freeman stan right now. I think it has so much to do with like Martin's take on the character, where like I love that he I think managed to capture the fastidiousness of Bilbo, and that like almost painful Hobbit apologia, still give him a real spunk and a real like latent backbone. I think movie Bilbo is a bit more Tookish from the outset than book Bilbo is, and that gives book Bilbo more of an arc. But I think like just in terms of like who to watch and like what character you're watching, it also made him read as like a little bit impulsive as well, which was interesting and new. And I really liked that. I was like, oh, like he's following this impulse. It's not a well thought out, and it's like he's not being arm wrestled in the same way that he was by Gandalf in the book. But so there's this other side of him, this like childlike, thoughtless gut reaction that he's following. And there's so much joy in it, which is because like you see him like content in the beginning, and you see him quiet, and you see him still. When he's running with the little contract, you see him like alive. And so I really, really love that like minute character change, and that's
a really interesting point, especially when we're talking about like Peter trying to create this like cohesiveness between his Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, and who's the only other Took that we really know?
Peregrine, our boy.
Yes, and who is the most impulsive of our four main hobbits? It's Pippin. So you kind of see him drawing, maybe not so much on what Tolkien actually like spelled out for us, but on the vibes and like the way that Billy Boyd was able to bring that Tookishness to the character, and what he knows his audience is most likely familiar with, because I think that he really leaned into that in the movies as far as like, whereas it's not so much like throwing a rock down the well, but he like squeezes the hand of that dead orc, and then that's what causes it to fall. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's it's like similar, but almost even more like impulsive, so which honestly like leads to great results for Pippin in the end. But yeah,
sometimes intrusive thoughts win for a reason, and we love that.
Yeah. King of intrusive thoughts is Pippin.
Yeah. What about y'all? Any last vibes?
Any last vibes?
For me, my favorite quote happened during this section of the movie, and I feel like it does sum up this conversation well, when it's "home is behind, the world is ahead." And I just feel like now we're really in it. Like, home is behind, we're having the trolls moment, the world is ahead, like all the adventure is just about to start.
More wink winks to Pippin in Lord of the Rings and the movies.
And considering who came back to sing the final end credits song, I fear that Pippin is actually the unsung hero of the Hobbit trilogy. Nobody's talking about this.
Oh my god!
Oh my god! Oh,
you're correct. We're literally that meme with like the things on the board.
Yeah,
we're like
with all the strings.
It's always sunny meme. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh man, amazing.
So what can we conclude from this? We are basically Gandalf. Pippin is the unsung hero of the Hobbit trilogy, and they probably could have left out that one line from this part of the movie.
Peter, if you're watching, that's our feedback.
Yeah, it's just a small cut.
Definitely listening. Yeah.
Maybe someday. Yeah, I mean, I feel like the Tolkien, at least like on the internet, we're all so connected. You know what I mean? Like there's people that I at the beginning of this year, or no, it is the beginning of 2022. The beginning, like a year ago, I'll say, like I didn't know. I would just watch people's videos. You know what I mean? And now it's like I can message almost all of these people, which is wild. So
yeah. It's really beautiful. It's like, and that's how I feel. And, I feel like the Hobbit conversation is tangential almost to the Rings of Power conversation, because it's like, at the end of the day, it's brought so many people together. Like, I think of the fandom spaces I occupied because of the Hobbit movies. And I think of like, I met y'all this year because of Rings of Power, straight up. Yeah. And I think like, ultimately, as long as the thing is made with a love for Tolkien, like there's only a net positive that will come out of it, and that's what my heart says.
Yeah, my heart would echo that. Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, is that it's like that's another thing that like I cannot shit on these movies the way that like previous past life Andy probably wanted to. You know what I mean? Like I definitely have hate watched them one time in a hotel room with Anna. And I was like, here's why that's wrong. Here's why you could never, like, how dare you, Thranduil? But then, like, but now it's kind of like, if it has brought you to Middle Earth and it has made you love this world, and it has, whether it's brought you to the books or not, like, if the, I think that it's sharing this, kind of cultural touchstone in a lot of ways is really magical, and in more ways than Tolkien probably could have imagined. And I think that if we really want to honor his legacy, I think that's it. It's like the friendship, the fellowship that we gain via meeting through these various mediums. You know what I mean? And so like, I think that has been one of the best things to come out of like any adaptation, is that we're able to like enjoy these things, pick them apart if you want to, but like if just coming at it from like a common space and like enjoying this other world together, it's a beautiful thing.
Super well said.
That was beautiful. That was crazy.
End the podcast.
Pack it up.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody. I think we're in I feel like we have these moments of like seriousness, and then we're just immediately like giggle boxes afterward.
Yeah. Because me and Callie were shook. We were like, damn. Oh man.
Well, Andy, you gave a great synopsis today. That was awesome. Like, thank you for this episode, and just like your whole thing about the appendices, like that was awesome. You did a great job.
Thank you so much.
That was because I was like, oh, we're going page by page. We're getting to it. The people are gonna learn.
Yes.
I love that.
In my heart, I'm a teacher. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. And Tolkien would have loved that. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. This is a literary analysis. We live for it.
Actually, yeah. I'm just nodding. I'm like, yeah.
I kind of snap. What can I say?
I'm having a good time, That's just my brain. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So I think, I hope that this means that next time we're going to tra-la-la-lally down in the valley.
Absolutely.
I think that's
it's time to see some trees.
Yeah.
That's what I feel like.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
So
I'm still waiting for the adaptation that gives us singing tree slinging elves. Still waiting.
yeah, I know. It's like we started off on a high note. Of, like, we incorporated 2 songs with the dwarves, and then where'd my Trollo Alley go? Like, I think this is one of the like. I don't know why, but when I think about The Hobbit, that is one of the first songs that, like, in my baby brain, like when I was reading these as a kid, like that stuck out to me just because I was like, oh, these elves be singing. They're like, what are you seeking? Like, I don't know, something about that weird ass rhyme, like, stuck out to me in a way that, like I know that we've been able to make the Far Over the Misty Mountains Cold, like, super iconic, and it's very catchy, and it's a great song. You hear it all over the TikToks now, but for me, it was Tralala-Lally, all right? Like, it was the Rivendell elves that was the first time where I was like, oh, something's different about this,
I love that. You're like, Misty Mountains could never, I fear. This is a real banger.
Because that was the moment where, like, I know we're getting ahead of ourselves, but because that was the moment where I was like, where the dwarves were very, like, I mean, they're dead set, and then they had their silly moment with, like, cracking the plates, and, like, the whole joke was that they weren't actually cracking the plates, but, like, the inherent joy of the elves in The Hobbit, I think it's such a different vibe from the elves that we see later, and but I still think it tracks at the same time with the elves that we know. You know what I mean?
Because that's before they really start, like, fading in earnest, and I almost wish we gotten that before snapshot. But no, we got emo hot dad. Yes. And that's the best we're gonna get, I fear.
Best I can do.
Right. He was like, I gave him dual swords that look really cool. What else do you want from me?
That's all that I know. That's all I can give you. Yeah. So we'll dive deep into that one next time. But for today, I just want to say, like, thank you so much, Anna Maria, for being here. I love you a lot. So I'm so glad you were finally able to join us. And I'm sure I'm gonna, like, try to bring you back whenever at some point, but whenever you want. But I'm put that out there now. Like, please, this was so fun.
This was so much fun. I will absolutely come back whenever y'all need.
Awesome.
I will be starting my official annual all 6 movies plus appendices rewatch, like, tomorrow.
Ooh, so, nice. Enjoy.
Yeah, that time of year. Yeah.
A year. So yeah, thank y'all for having me on. I'm obsessed with both of you. Y'all are legends.
And of course, Callie, thank you so much for always being my amazing co-host. I couldn't do it without you.